a couple things, just as we're always reminding ourselves of the covenants that we make together. When we have conversations where people tell their own stories or tell their own truths, when we leave this place, we ask you to kind of hold those people and allow them to have their own truth. What I mean is, when we leave this place, we don't go out and say, well, he said this and she said this. You can say what you heard, but sometimes it just makes it easier. The other thing is, we just want to be aware of how much space you're taking up versus other people are taking up. We want to leave lots of room for silence, and we also are aware that there's other people who aren't in this room, and so we're mindful of their needs as well. I am encouraged because this is a continuation of the work that your lesser chapter has begun. Remember, when we took a pause on our search last November and December, we identified a number of areas that we needed clarity on in order for us to be fully prepared to begin our search for a new dean. They included stewardship, meaning understanding our finances; hospitality, which is the way that we relate to the city and relate to each other; and also our mission. The final piece of that is not about our describing it to each other, but learning from our bishop about what it means to be a cathedral, which is different than it is to be a parish. And so that's what we're going to hear from today, is Thomas is going to make a presentation based on some conversations that we've begun at various points, but will continue today and into the future. Fair enough?
Fair enough.
Over to you, Father.
Thank you so much. Let's see. Can you hear me? Yeah, good. Thank you so much. You can put your hands together for George Stevens, because you love him. I got a call from a clergy person in Seattle who, I guess, pays attention to us and noticed that George has the title dean, and was kind of sad because she hopes to apply to be the dean, and assumed that there was not going to be a search because George is here forever. And I said, well, he's not here forever, so please stay tuned, because there will be more coming. I can't speak about whether she's great or not. She seems really nice. That's all I can say. Raise your hand if you have been part of St. Luke's Cathedral for 3 years or fewer. 3 years or fewer. Keep your hands nice and tall so that we can all kind of look around the room. These are persons who've been part of the community for 3 years or fewer. Thank you. You can put your hands down. Raise your hand if you've been part of the cathedral for 10 years or fewer. 10 years or fewer. And then raise your hand if you've been here for more than 10 years. Yeah, so probably about, I would say, I don't know, Sam, how would you slice this up? I would say, what? Pretty even. Probably a little more of you who've been here for longer, but it's really important for us to have some sense of how long we've been part of this. So to remind ourselves that as we speak today and listen today, that we are people who've been here a relatively short period of time. We are people who've been here for a good amount of time, and we are people who've been here for a long time. I think probably Eleanor. Well, raise your hand if you were baptized here as an infant. No, you were not. So Liz gets that. Liz is the only person in the room who gets, well, give her a round of applause. That's a big deal. I'm aware that, as George said, there are a lot of this work that I want us to engage today. And I'll just sort of, if we could commit to between 35 and 40 minutes total, would that be okay? And I will trust you all to be like giving me the high sign when we get to really about 20 minutes in. At the minimum, I want to make sure that you hear some things from me. But I do want to tee some things up. And before we do that, it's important to follow up on some things that George said about the lesser chapter. So raise your hand if you serve on chapter. I see the senior warden in the back, Peter, Laura, Dan, Eleanor, and Jamie. Thank you for your leadership, and please thank these people. It is a big job. It's a big job. For those of you who may not know, the lesser chapter is a different word, but similar in meaning to what other Episcopal churches call a vestry. We also use that word. We use the word vestry and we use the word lesser chapter. They are, for purposes of day-to-day living, they are the same. But I think it's important today, and you will notice when you hear me speak, I do use the words lesser chapter precisely because of the work that we are doing right now today, which is to say that parish churches don't have chapters, only cathedrals do. But part of the dynamic, part of our learning, ongoing learning, is to celebrate the ways in which we are both a cathedral and a parish church. But for purposes of today's conversation, I want us to focus more on who we are as a cathedral, and not in any way to discount the ways in which you have authority over your own governance. You have authority about all kinds of things, but there are certain things for which you as a cathedral church don't have as much authority as a local parish church. And then there are some other ways in which you have more authority. So the lesser chapter is not, it's very important for us to bear this in mind. They know this, and I speak to them about this all the time. The lesser chapter is not a board of directors. They are a community of people elected by you to join with your clergy in leading this cathedral church in every aspect of leadership, in the temporal affairs, in the money, in the property, and they are also spiritual leaders. Vestry members and in your case, lesser chapter members are sick and tired of my talking about the role that they play as spiritual leaders, which is to say that when they said yes to your saying yes to them, to your inviting them to be on the lesser chapter, they did not merely say yes to figuring out the budget. They did not merely say yes to figuring out how to keep this beautiful church in great shape. They also said yes to bring their faith, their questions, their concerns, their spiritual hunger, their spiritual sense of being sated. All of that in some ways needs to be the front and center, and those other pieces follow so much more easily. I'm looking at a couple of clergy persons in the room, and we often say to lesser chapter or to a vestry or really any committee, when we spend 10, 15, or even 20 minutes forming ourselves with scripture or saying some prayers or telling each other's stories as they relate to how God is involved in our lives. When we do that work, before we get to the agenda of the meeting goes so much better. And for those of us who are type A's, that can be a little hard because we get to the meeting, we want to get going. And the challenge always is, what can we do first to ground ourselves in the knowledge and love of God and of each other, and then proceed to whatever the agenda is. And the reason I point that out is because what I have experienced in your lesser chapter is that very value. And I don't think it's new. I think it's been part of this community for a long time. But as I go more and more to lesser chapter meetings, I am a member, by the way. I think I have the authority to chair the meetings, but I don't. I give that to George. And what I experience every time that I gather at the lesser chapter is this deep commitment to you, to the whole community, and a deep commitment to faith. At the end of the day, if we are not putting that front and center, we really, nothing else matters. That our relationship with God is primary. And very often when whether it's the cathedral, whether it's another parish, whether it's a summer chapel, the places where I travel every Sunday, where there is tension, where there's conflict, where there's a lack of energy, it's very often a reflection of a community who needs more practice talking about who God is and where God is in each of their lives. So I feel that and I sense that in your lesser chapter, and I'm really, really grateful. Let me ask a couple of questions. What is a cathedral? What do you think a cathedral is? There are lots of answers, by the way, so there is no right answer to this question. But I would love to hear some of your voices. What do you think a cathedral is? Generally, I'm not speaking about St. Luke's now. Just when you think about cathedral, Ken and Clough.
One of those things is a pilgrimage.
Thank you. A pilgrimage church. Shayna. The seat of the bishop. That's right. And do you all know what that's called? The cathedra. Do you know where that is? There is one there. There's one way up in the sanctuary, and it's on the far left. And if you are here sometime, and if you haven't looked at it, you'll see it's to the left of the altar as you're facing the altar. And I think I've sat in it one time, which was the day that I was installed. But it is true that a cathedra is a noun, and it is the seat or the chair of the bishop. What else is a cathedral? The center point of the diocese. That's a really important point, and I want us to come back to that because I think it needs some more definition. Kathy, and then Will. Spiritual leader in the community. So the whole cathedral is a spiritual leader, right, for the wider community. Will? A resource and an exemplar to other parishes. Thank you. Other things? Yes, Liz.
However, that doesn't represent the population that's within it. Are we referring strictly to the structure?
Both. So, yeah.
I'm just talking about the structure.
Right. So for you, the association of architecture and music, that's part of what I'm hearing you say, right? Yeah. Other voices, Peter. And then. Thank you. Linda. Yeah. Invitation to the wider city and to the world to enter into the life of Christ, the life of the divine, the great mystery. There's all kinds of words that we might use, but thank you. Other things? Yes, Joe.
It's an architectural form of testimony to generations of faith.
Yes.
It represents hope.
Yeah. Architecturally symbolic, both of the past and of the future. Yes. Of people and the way in which we welcome people. Thank you, Linda. What is a cathedral not? If we could sort of flip this question in a slightly negative way in the sense of defining what we are not. Pardon? Either way. Yes. So cathedrals are both grand buildings, but some of what you're saying is that your experience is that sometimes because of the architecture, they can be cold. Yeah. It's not empty. Cathedrals are not empty. Yeah, good. Yes, over here. Yes, Tom.
Not a place just for us.
Ah, so Tom, all of you answered correctly. But this point that Tom is making really resonates with me, which is, say it again?
It's not a place just for us.
It's not a place just for us. And that is a really key thing, and it is not the same for parish churches. I would love for it to be true for parish churches, and I would love for more parishes in Maine to have that sense. I think it is essential, actually, for every faith community to have a bigger sense of that. But I can't say to St. Giles Jefferson or to St. Paul's in Fort Fairfield that they should be, that they should have this bigger sense that they are not there for themselves. Because in those two particular places, the way in which their life is expressed is largely about them. And it doesn't say that they don't care about their communities. Of course they do. But they are 15 to 20 people or 30 to 40 people. And in their history, in their DNA, is a sense that we are here to form a community that will feed us so that we can feed others. That there's a nuance about a cathedral that is very different about that. And much more sense of it's really not about what individuals or what we might think it ought to be, but always asking the question, how can we be for others? What can we be for others? Not to suggest that we can be all things to all people, but cathedrals, I think, are responsible and given the gift of continually being able to think bigger and to think about for whom else can we be responding? Who might we be that might attract or might appeal or might challenge us to be bigger than what we can ask or imagine? That's a really important thing. Philip. It's not cohesive. Yeah, that's so true. Priscilla. Pardon? That is a big challenge. Yes. Yeah. How do you answer that, Priscilla? Yeah. 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 Thank you. Anybody else? Someone who's not spoken? Anything about cathedrals generally? What about St. Luke's Cathedral? How do you experience St. Luke's in those ways that we've just described cathedrals? How do you... Another way to think about this question is, if you were on an airplane this afternoon and you had to fly from Logan to San Francisco, and you were sitting next to someone who was chatty, and even though you wanted to read your book, you were gracious because the person really wanted to chat. And at some point, the person next to you says, so tell me about, you just said you went to St. Luke's Cathedral. Tell me about St. Luke's Cathedral. What is that? And what do you do? How do you respond to that person, even though you'd rather read your book? Respond to those questions. You've got 4.5 hours on a plane to tell this person about, yes, Phoenix.
I would say it's a really nice, cool place in Portland, Maine, and the people there are really nice, and the interior design is very like calm and cozy, and it's a very welcoming place. And I'll just end it there because I'm not really a conversationalist.
That's stunning. That's stunning, Phoenix. Thank you. Thank you. So it's welcoming, right? Yeah, Will. So you would make a comparison or a contrast and try to get them to think of. Mhm. What about St. Luke's? What would you say about the specific ways in which we are, Jamie?
Mr. Platt for that, I just say that I like the church because there's a couple options there, and you go one service with music, and service in the morning is like the one that I went to when I was a kid. My dad used to have his watch going, so the violins came going. And but that being said, the people there are accepting, welcoming, but also this thing that attracted me in the early 2000s. There's a reason attached to the only Bible schooling that I do is I tell them I listen to the readings, I listen to the sermon, and I feel better when I came to the service each time I come. And so that's how I explain to St. Luke's that I feel better when I come here, and the people that are here are good.
Thank you. Thank you. Linda, and then Maggie.
Councilman, that it's a church that takes tradition and faith seriously, and not only encourages, but requires us to think about and interpret what the meaning
Mm. Thank you. I want to come back to that too. That's really key. Maggie, and then
Yeah, I would go on the same thing with Linda that the tradition is really an old tradition and that we have practices that we do. And a lot of people, when I told them that, said, you really like all those established traditions. And I responded, yeah, and find steady ground.
Mhm.
And there's some small churches that don't have universal ministry. And, I tell them about that. I tell them about being a clergyman. And, they're really amazed at clergymen. They've never heard of them. And they said, but how come you like that? And I said, it's grounding, but I can connect more with Jesus.
Thank you.
I would say it's a place with many different communities
Mm.
that are welcoming, and also many different ministries.
Yeah. Different communities, different ministries. Thank you, Shayna. And then Liz. The beauty that comes out of growing pains. Thank you. Liz.
I describe this place as
A family.
a very large family with a lot of diversity, which makes it more interesting. And the people face here their faith from all different points of view. You can always find a conversation where someone sees it differently than you do. It's a great place to grow, but it's also a great place to feel a sense of community.
Thank you. So there is a regard for tradition, even as there is an invitation to explore for ourselves how this faith lives and sometimes doesn't live. Eleanor.
Building off of that, I would also say that St. Luke's is a progressive church. We are steeped in tradition and find that very important, but we are inclusive and accepting of people that often are marginalized by other faiths. And I find that that's a point of pride that I belong to a church that is accepting.
Yeah, thank you. Why St. Luke's as opposed to a parish? I'm going to come to Dan, Curtis, and then Liz.
I find it to be an uplifting community rooted in ancient traditions, ancient liturgy, those ancient roots with modern theology.
Thank you. Liz.
Because the tradition, teaching, liturgy, and all that was why I didn't want to join it first. It was very blunt.
Yeah, thank you.
There was, it's not my form of faith,
Yeah.
but found here an opportunity to serve other people based on what we hear on Sunday in sermon, and we feel inspiration from the music. So there's opportunities within this church to go out into the wider community
Yeah.
and be of service to
Yeah,
Jesus.
yeah. Thank you. Thank you for naming the fact that that there are various things that attract us and ground us and keep us, and it's not all related to liturgical expression, but some of the things that you just named. Dan. Mm. Right, right. Uh-huh. Say that again, a little louder. The leading missionary church of the whole diocese. Thank you for that. I want to leave you with a kind of sense of continuing to think about how St. Luke's is all the things that we've just described, and I recognize that there are things that we haven't named, but continue to think about your own sense of call to St. Luke's and the ways in which that call and who we are together, how is it that we as a cathedral church can or should or might do those things in a kind of bigger way or a brighter light or a clearer sense of direction from St. Peter's in Portland or Trinity in Portland or St. Albans in Cape Elizabeth or St. Mary's in Falmouth? What is it about us as a cathedral community that is different from and similar to being a parish church? I think this is ongoing work, and I do not in any way suggest that we can do this today and it'll be done. It is ongoing work for a cathedral in a way that it is not for a parish, because you have these two identities. You are in fact a parish, and you are in fact a cathedral in all of the ways that you have just described. Let me shift gears a little bit and share with you some things that, first of all, lesser chapter members, you had a chance to do a little exercise with me last month, and it was just your story, but I want to leave room for you in particular. Is there anything you want to add about your own sense of a cathedral or St. Luke's? Jamie, Eleanor, John, who else? Laura, Peter. Anything you want to add? Lesser chapter people. Yes, Paul. Thank you. Priscilla, and then Eleanor, and then Peter, and then I'm sorry, Priscilla, can you speak up? Yeah. I don't know if you heard, did you hear Priscilla refer to the kneelers? And there are people in the chapel today who worked on those kneelers, but it is one of the ways in which we have an outward and visible sign, these are my words, an outward and visible sign of being a center for the whole diocese. And why don't you stand and tell us about it, Priscilla? Well,
I think there's a kneeler for every parish. That's the intention, and we've been working on it for how many years? Over 20 years, yeah. So that's a part of the acknowledgement that we
thank you so much. Peter.
When I come to the 10 o'clock service, I see the majesty of the music in the building. I see the mystery that is given through the ritual. But in addition to that, going to the 5:15 service is a way to explore how that mystery affects me and be able to ask those questions. There's a difference in religious expression.
Yeah. Thank you for that. It's true. Today we will have gathered in four very different expressions, but we will have worshiped God. We did it at the 7:30. No music, very quiet. I think there were 14 of us. We were in here. Straight up prayer book communion. And then the 10 o'clock. Today was obviously a little expanded given our life. And then today at 4 o'clock will be evensong, and then the 5:15, which is a very different expression. And that's something that, it's not to say that parish churches can't do that or shouldn't do that. It is to say that cathedrals really ought to do that. Cathedrals really ought to be continually finding new ways, different ways to express this great mystery. But that, of course, takes resources. And just because we're a cathedral doesn't mean that we have the capacity financially to do all the things that we want to do. And so part of the reason why your lesser chapter is addressing these various pillars, one of them is really to get clear for ourselves about what does it mean to fund and to support not just the things we want to do as a community called to be a cathedral church, but also how we want to be for the rest of the community and how we want to be for the city. And so some of you have mentioned this. I do think that a cathedral, in both the English sense and the American sense, has an identity about its city, even if it's a small city. So there's a cathedral in Easton, Maryland. Raise your hand if you've been to Easton, Maryland. It's not a very big town. It's pretty small. But even that little cathedral in that little town has a sense that they have an identity and a responsibility and a delight to be thinking about the city of Easton, Maryland. And that's true at St. Luke's and sort of always has been. One little piece of history, some of you know this well, some of you may not know this. We are the first cathedral in our church to be built to be a cathedral. We are the oldest cathedral in the Episcopal Church. There are some other cathedrals who were built before us, but they were not built to be cathedrals. They became cathedrals, named cathedrals later. We are the first cathedral in the entire Episcopal Church that was built to be a cathedral. And there are not very many of us. I think there were 6 of us total that were built to be a cathedral. But we were first. So that doesn't make us better. But it does mean that there's something in our DNA that I really want us to continue to wrestle with, to honor, to celebrate. to do these things, to continually ask ourselves, what does it mean to be a cathedral? How are we a cathedral in this moment? How are we not? How are we more like a parish church? Let me share some things. George, do you want to say anything? Of course you do.
No, I just want to say that this is ongoing work. One of the things that's interesting that Thomas mentioned is that what our identity is continues to evolve. I want to call us back to the way he introduced us of people who have been here less than 3 years, more than 10,
Fewer than-
10 years, all the way.
Fewer than 3.
Fewer than 3. So there's a way in which we're always growing and we're always changing, and so our identity is never static. Part of that is because our tradition as Episcopalians is to continue to grow and emerge. We have scripture, tradition, and reason to guide us, but the reasonableness of us allow us to continue to change as political winds blow, as scriptural identity changes, all of that stuff. The work that we're doing here today is part and parcel of your lesser chapter and your wider church's work of understanding how we will explain our identity to the candidates who come. And I will say what the many ways in which you have expressed what you believe about a cathedral and what you believe about St. Luke's are essential. And they've been captured in the great work of our mission committee, and they are going to be shared widely with the people who are going to be applying, maybe even that lady from Seattle, right? My sense is that even a meeting like this, great candidates will probably watch it, right? And so they'll also be learning from you about whether they're called into ministry in partnership with you all. I think that's it, now that the stuff's handed out.
That's great. Ruth?
I have a question.
Yes.
To clarify before you go on. You talked about the cathedral and its, my word, I think, responsibility to the city within which it exists. But so is this cathedral church responsible to Portland or to the entire diocese?
Both. Did you all hear the question? Are we responsible to the city of Portland, or are we responsible to the whole diocese? The answer is both. But when I was speaking about the city, I was really speaking about the city of Portland and the metropolitan area. That what I desire and what I think is a faithful response to a cathedral from a cathedral church is to continually be asking, who are the folk in the city and the metropolitan area of Portland who are in leadership, with whom we have a relationship? Do we know the chief of police? Do we know the leadership in the fire department? Do we know people in the mayor's office? Are those civic leaders people who get invited to be with us? Are there Sunday mornings when we hear from the superintendent of the Portland schools? Those are really important missional questions, I think. Not to say that we can be all things to all people, but you, I think, have a responsibility and an opportunity to know city leaders in a way that I would not expect, though I would be delighted if Trinity and St. Peter's also did that. But there's something unique about your charism to know the city, and what I mean by knowing the city is being actually relationally connected and being able to call by name people in elected and appointed leadership. Does that help? Yeah. Yes. Philip.
I was just thinking about something you just said, the fact that we were the first people. And I also think back in the summer, I go to St. Anthony's Cathedral. In the 1850s, the people of Dallas decided that they needed a church. And they went to New York to hire James Reverend to design the church in Cathedral. It's the only red-brick building in Maine. And what a sense of optimism and ambition was in that 25 families that I think we should share that sense of optimism and ambition about how we can impact with those conversations.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, Kathy. Mhm. Say more about that. Just tell me more, because I'm not sure what you mean. Uh-huh, right. So, right, I mean, I do think that that is a great thing that the cathedral could do. I think local churches also do that, right? And so I personally would not describe that, gathering other faith leaders, as something that would make it unique to St. Luke's. But it certainly is an important thing, whether St. Luke's does it or someone else does it. It's important for Christians and people of other faith to be connected. And there is a life in the city of Portland about that. And it's always an ongoing thing, and there's always changes. You know, George will leave us at some point, so there's a kind of revolving door. But I think, Kathy, it's really important to hold up that that's a value. It may not be necessarily what we have to do in terms of sponsoring it, but we better be there wherever it's happening. Yeah. So what about the diocese? I think the kneelers are in fact an outward and visible sign, but I think there are some other ways. And I think that what I would love is for this cathedral church to use more explicit language on Sundays about this piece about being a spiritual, a symbolic spiritual center for Maine. I think that there's an opportunity for you, in a way that there isn't other churches, to be praying in a bigger way for particular churches. I think there are members of the lesser chapter who could call churches throughout Maine, make an appointment for a 30-minute Zoom, and ask those leaders at St. Anne's in Calais or at St. George's in Sanford, tell me about your life. And we are at the cathedral, but we're really interested in hearing more about what is blessing and what is challenging you right now. And we would like, in the course of the next 60 months, you know, that's a kind of payment plan for a big Ford truck. But if you took 60 months and you had a timeline in which every month or every fortnight you were focusing in some ways in your leaflet or in announcements on Sundays or in the epistle, that in front of you were some stories and some realities of the churches throughout Maine. That would be a really helpful thing. And it would be helpful not only, I think, for you as a cathedral, but it would tell those churches something about your care for them and your respect for their own expression. Those are three things. I would add a couple of other things. I think for you all to think about hospitality, which you do well, but there's always room for more. How can you be clear that when you open your doors for a diocesan event, it's not a pain in your neck, but it is in fact a source of joy for you? That I expect St. Luke's Cathedral to have joy in welcoming people from other churches in the Diocese of Maine. That should be much higher for you than it should be for Emmanuel in Augusta. I would never say to Emmanuel that they shouldn't open their doors to all of you. Of course they should. But there's something particular about you as a cathedral that when you open your doors to any diocesan event, it should be welling up in you as something that gives you great joy. Does that help? Let me ask you, how would you answer the question about specifics about diocesan identity? Marianne Buddy. Thank you. Thank you. That's very helpful. Judd.
How do we serve the entire diocese? And this may be too small an example, but the healing team is contacted by another healing team from a small church.
It's not a small example.
And we hopefully will be talking about having a gathering of all the other healing teams and how we can both serve our congregations, but also the churches as well as their.
Thank you. No, that's a great example. One of the things on this sheet of paper that I'm leaving with you, you'll see on page 2, our mission in the next 3 to 5 years. I've purposely I would never do this for you or for any other church. I would never say that this is what you ought to do. But I've put down there 2 particular examples that I know are true about you. And I think another piece of work, especially after you call your next dean, is to flesh this part out more. I'm not a big fan of strategic plans. I think that it's 2025, and I think that life is changing so rapidly that the idea that even we had, I would say, 7 years ago, organizations, especially in the church, who think that they can create a plan for the next 7 to 10 years. I do not personally believe that that is possible or effective. But I do think thinking about 3 to 5 years and being very specific is possible. And these are 2 things, and it gets to Paul's point, and it gets also to Judd's point about particularly your work with walking together, which is the phrase that we are using, borrowed from the Washington National Cathedral, about responding to people who are most vulnerable right now, particularly in this political climate coming from Washington. There is a way in which your ministry in walking together can easily be adapted and replicated in parish churches throughout Maine, and that is a way in which you could be another kind of leader for places who haven't yet imagined that. So, for instance, Good Shepherd in Rangeley is not full of people from Angola. And so they may not be able to relate to the ways in which you are caring for asylum seekers and people who are trying to find a home in this nation from another nation. But there are other ways in which the walking together does apply absolutely to the people at Good Shepherd Rangeley when it comes to hospitality, or when it comes to responding to people who are trans and their families. When it comes to responding to food insecurity, there are all kinds of walking together ways that you could inspire or help or encourage or thank churches, and they could join you, and that could be a diocesan-wide thing. Jamie.
Well, I'm kind of jumping back to where you were about 5 sentences ago. And so I'm a rather simple person. I just like to forward the idea that this next search for dean or cathedral, our big message going forward, if it somehow, and it's going to have a sense of purpose, and this is why I actually came today, was my voice for this would be, if somehow this next effort gets off track, and I don't quite understand what is happening right now, but I have faith in this leadership just to choose somebody to come in and do it, to take over as dean. And I'm not going to get into all the details of everything that's the construct that put this together, But if this gets off track again, part of having faith in your life is, I got faith in my doctor. Do I have faith in my investment manager? These things aside, sometimes you have to turn things over. You just have to. And so hopefully it's implicit in this, that if this next search kind of starts to go off track, that it's okay at times to turn it over to the powers that be. I'm going to leave it there. My wife tells me I get talking too much.
Well, she's not here.
Anyway, and these people, Bishop, George, everybody's fallible, but
George isn't, but I am.
somebody like this person from So again, I'm just going to simply state that somehow this thing gets, the implicit in this is that a next decision should be made.
Thank you. I'm going to move us on a little bit. A question, yes, Liz.
I'm just going to throw this out there. One time as a school teacher, I was invited by the imam to a Muslim faith service. The police chief was there and spoke. Many other city leaders were there and spoke. This was about 12 years ago. It was wonderful. I didn't understand most of it. It was in a different language. But if we look at the population we serve, shouldn't we also be connecting with the Muslim faith?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So just to affirm, the answer is yes. And when I was responding particularly to Kathy's question about clergy and religious association in the city, I said Christian and other faiths. And I think particularly, though I would never diss Buddhists or Hindus, but especially Muslims and Jews, that we have to be connected to those siblings as well. Yeah, just to sort of, I mean, all kinds of ways. Yeah. Let me walk you through this a little bit. I'm mindful of time, and I would be happy to come again. I know that there's more work for the lesser chapter and for me to do as we get ready to do the work that Jamie has just referred us to. But I want to just give you some sense about where I'm coming from. So I put a little purpose there about why we're doing this today. I've given you my own take on what I think a cathedral is. And then I've given you some prompts about what I think and what I see as a possible way forward in terms of our life together. So those are vision things, and they are, I've put them in bold type, so you have some sense of where both my vision is and where my faith is springing up. And so these are values as well as vision. But then really the values are on the second page. And again, I think it would be dangerous for St. Luke's to take this and just adopt it whole cloth. I think that what I hope is that today is the kind of beginning of prompting in you, which clearly you've already done. We just spent 40 minutes listening to each other about some of these big questions. So it's clear to me that you have appetite to actually do this work. Here are some values that I see in you already that I want to lift up. So this is not so much Thomas Brown saying, this is what I think you should be doing in terms of core values. It is my saying, this is what I see. This is what I hear. This is in some ways what I actually taste from you, that you value all of these things. I want to thank Randy Hogan in particular. I did share this first draft with the wardens and with Randy and George. And Randy responded and said, something that I wish there was an explicit statement was the life of our mind and learning and wisdom. And so you see wisdom and discernment. That comes directly, almost verbatim, from what it is that your treasure said she valued. And so what I hope is that this document will get torn to shreds and recreated based on how you understand God's call. I think some of these things are embedded and sort of in your DNA, but there are all kinds of things that are also possible that I don't yet know, but you know. And listening to each other, I think there could be a really clear roadmap for the next few years. So I leave this with you not as a fait accompli that says, this is who you are going to be. I leave it with you, I hope, as an inspiration for your own prayer life, for your discussions with each other, for your engagement with the lesser chapter, and that depending upon how this shakes out, that is what we will use to attract candidates to be your next dean. Does that help? Thank you for your time today, and thank you for your faith and for all of the ways in which you care about God and about this community. I'm so grateful to you. I know that there are any number of things that you could have been doing today, and there are demands on each one of our times. And what you did today was to say, I want to be invested in the future of St. Luke's. And I see that, and I want you to know that I see you, and I'm so grateful to you. So thank you for a great day. Are there any other final announcements or things we need to go?
I will let you know that your Leicester chapter is meeting on Tuesday night to consider our next steps and calling together a search committee. You'll be hearing this week about some decisions that we're making around timing and around leadership of that. I just also want to say thank you, Thomas, for coming. One of the things that we didn't acknowledge but is worth acknowledging is that your presence here is an indication of a shared relationship that at times historically has been less than this friendly, right? And so there's a way in which this demonstrates your investment, and I hope that you hear from us our investment in learning from you at the same time. Does that make sense? Thank you, Thomas.
Thank you. Have a wonderful Rabbit first day of June.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. What? I should have said that because there.